Welcome back, MTG Joe here. It's that time of week again, weekly meta breakdown where we cover the top performing decks on the Arena ladder. This particular video, standard best of one, looking for best of three, looking for historic, looking for explore. We'll even try out some alchemy this week, see if there's enough data from the recent Lord of the Rings set. We got you covered. Check out the playlist, and we get the data every week that you see on the screen from UntapkedGG. Companion tool that runs alongside Arena's client, tracks your win rate, and then also aggregates the data, gives us all these cool stats. Link is in the video description if you want to get started with Untapped, as well as I'll paste all these deck lists. I'll also, where possible, paste video demos of the deck in action. I'm also starting off with some sideboard guides for the best of three format. Started off with Esper Legends, so if you're interested in sideboard guides, take a look at the video, let me know what you think. And I'll try to build out some more of those depending on how reception goes with those. So we'll jump into it as always. I do want to pose a YouTube question. What deck are you playing most in standard best of one right now? What's your favorite deck? What's working the best for you? Let me know in the comments. But we are going to be looking from the last 7 days, Diamond Mythic rank. But what we start off with as always is the meta kind of popularity of the day. So you have the range at the top here. Don't worry so much of that. We're looking at the snapshot of the day in terms of what's been popular. So popularity of decks doesn't necessarily translate to the most winning decks. Like last week, for example, Esper Control was very popular, but had a very low win rate relative to some of the other decks on the format. So people will play decks that they enjoy. Doesn't necessarily mean they win. So we have kind of the main offenders: Mono Red Aggro, Mono White Humans, Selesnya Enchantments. We've actually seen an uptick in mono blue the last few days, and we've seen it'll be one of the results that we have in terms of overall win rate. We see Azorius Control, and then some representation of Domain and mono black. Domain's been performing pretty poorly. Domain's more of a best of three deck, I think. It tends to be a little bit slower of a format, so then you can go greed pile. In best of one, like an early Thalia can get you. It's hard to kind of configure your deck to both beat aggressive decks as well as control decks. So it tends to be one of the more outlier decks. So we have kind of that breakdown there. If we're looking into the actual results, like I said, we're going to look June 17th through to today is the 24th. Diamond and Mythic rank. 94,000 games of Standard were played in that time frame. And we're going to look at a couple different versions. So Mono Red's had a couple different variants that have popped up. So there's obviously like the 4X Thundering Raiju version, heavy creature package. We've seen that week in, week out. If you want that list, just check out from like the Untapped. When you click the link, you can see all the past lists there. But we have kind of two variants this week that are a little bit different and kind of interesting to see how Mono Red's evolved. So this version here has got a 63% win rate. It's kind of an ode back to the mechanized warfare with an increase in these like creature mirrors, like small creature mirrors. And the festivities actually plays really well. Allows you to kind of deal with a go wide from like soldiers or something like that. If you stack it with mechanized warfare, each mech warfare makes and the festivities deal 1 more damage to your opponent. So you can do 2, 3 to each of their creatures potentially while keeping yours alive. A lot of pingers in this deck, so pings, cheap creatures, so very low curve, playing with 20 lands. If you're going to play this deck, play a 1 of Sokazen in the mana base. Basically free value. You have Feldins as well as Reckless Impulse and a Chandra for card advantage. Lightning Strike, play with fire as your burn damage. And then Squee as just another recursive creature that can put pressure, especially if you're going wide with Mech Warfare. Makes each of the additional goblins a little bit better in terms of damage. So there's that version of Mono Red. Now non-sequentially, like this isn't the next best deck as a second Mono Red, but I want to pair them together to see kind of compare and contrast. So this version of the deck's at 60%. So it's kind of a hybrid of like usually you see either like 4 of Squee, 4 of Raiju, or sometimes you see Furnace Punisher in the slot here. This version here, it's trimming on a number of lands. So usually you see like 22 to 23. Again, play a Sokazen, it's free. This version is playing 3 Furnace Rains. So this deals with like a big creature to your opponent. Think of it kind of as a pseudo removal spell. You get rid of the last little points of damage. You get rid of a blocker. You can deal with like an Atraxa if it cheats in, any kind of random creature. And then it lets you push through those additional points of damage, potentially even ramping you. You're kind of stuck on mana to your Thundering Raiju. version's also playing Reinforced Ronin, so a card that gets around sweepers by allowing you to recast it. It is kind of pseudo card disadvantage because you're paying a mana every turn, so it doesn't allow you to consistently build your board state, but it does play around sorcery speed removal. The rest of the deck is fairly similar to the Play with Fires. This one's on full 4 Strangle, 4 Lightning Strike, 4 Play with Fire, so a lot more interaction, a little bit fewer threats, but a way to kind of deal with the board while putting consistent pressure on your opponent. From there, we go to Selesnya Enchantments. So again, a couple different versions of the deck that are popping up. So this one's 63% win rate, and it's kind of the bigger Hallowed Haunting version. So last month I finished, time's all a blur now. I think it was last month. In May, I finished top 1200 with Enchantments. I was playing more Hallowed Haunting versions when Rakdos pre-ban. It was a good way to deal with like Invoke Despairs and Fables and stuff like that, heavy removal decks. So I did like that. This looks closer to my version, minus like the Rite of Harmony, so I wasn't playing that. But this is a heavier on the Saga version. So with the Sagas themselves, on your upkeep, when they're about to flip, you can cast Rite of Harmony, because this just cares if an enchantment entered the battlefield under your control, not cast. So with these flipping themselves over, you're able to get that trigger and get some card draw, which is nice in terms of the deck. Hallowed Haunting lets you get you creatures every time you cast an enchantment. So this gives you a wide board. You got your Calyx in here to pump up stuff, similar with Generous Visitor, card draw, and like Spirited Companion. You have 5 removal spells, some Wedding Announcement, could be pseudo card advantage, Audacity for if you have a big creature, you can give it Trample as well. So we see that version of the deck. 21 lands, if you're not playing Restoration, then 21 lands is too few. But because you are playing the Restoration, it's easier to find lands. So this is kind of a pseudo land in terms of the line count. Then we go to the more traditional, and you can see just in terms of the match counts at 2200. So this is kind of the more stock version. This is the more aggressive version. So this is better into more of the creature mirrors, I find. Worse into control because you have to commit more to the board in this case. So you get hit harder by like Sunfall, Farewell ruins both the decks. So it's not really like you're not playing around Farewell, but heavy targeted removal, this version kind of gets hit harder in general. But you're like Kami gets really big, Calyx and Generous Visitor puts counters. Catilda can be a way to race some of the aggressive decks, but it is usually a little bit later of a play. You don't want it to get caught up in like burn damage. But you can double triggers with Weaver Harmony. You have removal and ossification. Mishiko can also pump up things really large. So if you have a big lifelinker, you can put the counters, or a big trampler. You can kind of push through a lot of damage there. I don't like 20 lands. People keep playing really low land counts. Like the curve is fairly low, but it is a mana hungry deck in a way because you want to cast multiple things. You have ways to kind of draw cards. Weaver, you want to double up triggers. So I find it a little skimping on some lands. I would probably play an additional land, to be honest, and just play 3 Calyx. We then go to Azorius Soldiers at just a shade under 61%. So this is pretty much the stock list. We see the Resolute Reinforcement package, Valiant Veteran, your 1-drops. This one's on all of the 3-drops. Sometimes you see a fewer number of 3-drops, playing more 2-drops, maybe the flash version with counter spells. I think the version with the 3-drops is the best. The counterspell ones you often kind of get underpowered. All these cards are very impactful. Brutal Cathar being removal, Siege Veteran lets your creature scale and get bigger, and then provide pseudo removal insurance. Obviously not against exile, but direct removal, depopulate, stuff of that nature. Sky Strike Officer helps break board stalls. It's an evasive creature and gives you card advantage, which this deck doesn't really have another avenue to get card advantage. So I think that's impactful in that respect. And then Myrel could kind of run away with the game as well. You have a lot of utility lands in this deck as well, between Mishra's Foundry, the Fortified Beachhead, and some of the channel lands mixed in. From Azorius Soldiers, we go to Mono White Humans. So kind of similar approach to things. This deck doesn't have like the same Sky Strike Officer repeated card draw, but it does have Knight Errant of Eos that lets you tap down your creatures in a similar fashion to get card advantage in a way. Plays really nicely with stuff like Adeline because she can make a lot of tokens, but she also has Vigilance. Same with the Anointed Peacekeeper, which allows you to attack in and then post-combat tap them. So some value there. Your Lord in this deck is the Intrepid Adversary to pump up your team. You have the Hopeful Initiate to get it bigger. Coppercoat Vanguard is another pseudo-Lord that also provides Ward, so it makes it a tax effect in terms of the direct damage. And then similar kind of utility lands in the mana base with this one here. So we spoke about mono blue. It actually had a pretty good week. It was down the last couple weeks in terms of play, like percentage of games won. It does usually have a little bit of a hard time against some of the aggressive decks. An early Thalia, for example, can be a bit painful. We see Assimilate Essence as a new card that has come in. So 2 mana, counter target creature, battle spell, unless they pay 4. If they do, then you get to incubate 2. So not a completely dead card, at least can make you a body if needed. So splitting that with Make Disappear. Moment of Truth lets you kind of anticipate, but puts the card into the graveyard, which is nice because you want spells in your graveyard that fuel the Tolarian Tear, being very cheap, or the Haughty Djinn. This version, I do like the kind of more interaction early between Fading Hope and March. So a lot of cheap kind of counters mixed into the deck itself. Flow of Knowledge lets you refill your hand. And then we have Naya Humans, so kind of a similar overlap to the mono white humans, but with the additional colors that you get in the deck, you get Catilda as kind of a ramp effect. Notably, no Coppercoat Vanguard in this version. You have Malara's Protection. Your kind of pump effect is the Halana and Alana. That gets your creatures larger. We have 2 of the Sigarda, Champion of Light. In past weeks, we've actually seen the other Aftermath Sigarda as well. Gives all your other creatures hexproof and card advantage. So something you could consider in the build as well. If you want to look at that list, it's in, like I said, the Aether Hub. You can just take a look with that. But you kind of have a similar overlap. You're playing like Plaza, Heroes, Secluded Courtyard to help fix your mana. You have a number of legendaries that get the advantage of the Plaza. With all these creature decks, we have Azorius Control. So this deck is going to be trying to say no in a variety of ways. So you have counter spells, Union of the Third Path, kind of like it seems kind of bad, but in like practice it actually works out pretty good because even if you're just gaining some incidental life, you can do it on turn 3. You play a couple lands. Sometimes just gaining like 5 life can give you that buffer you need to Sunfall or Farewell. Your top end sweepers could kind of punish a lot of the decks. Having played a lot of enchantments, these 2 cards wreck the enchantment deck. You also have the Wandering Emperor, so if the opponent's not going wide and committing, you can kind of just exile. This version's on a lot of, like, Jace technically could be a 3-drop, but it is pretty heavy in terms of 4-drops that could potentially also be hit by Thalia. So that's something to consider there. Potentially, we see Elspeth's Smite. Sometimes these decks will play the Triomes, so they can play Laydown Arms. With this version here, they're opting to not play Ossification. They have 8 basics, but you can kind of configure the deck depending on how you want to approach it. But like a Thalia is going to somewhat hurt this deck. But you kind of win through Jace Mill, Wandering Emperor, making tokens, or a Sunfall token kind of mixed into there. Then we go to Esper Legends. So like I mentioned, I do have a sideboard guide for a best of 3 variant of this deck. So if you want to, you're playing best of 1, you're learning this. The sideboard version of the deck is in the playlist for Standard, so you can check that out if you want to see how to build a sideboard, what to bring in, what to take out in each of the popular matchups where we've done that. So this deck here is kind of built around Rafine. What you want to do is just play a bunch of legends, attack in, connive, make really big creatures. You get bonus of discarding stuff with like Raven Man, make tokens. Rona lets you draw discard each time you cast a legendary, you can untap it. Going like Skrelv into either Denic or Thalia into Rafine's really powerful. You have protection, either lifelink or tax effects. Adeline lets you kind of go wide. And then Urtai is kind of counter removal, Shieldred on the top end, Stonewalls a lot of the creature decks. And then lastly, mono black aggro, mid-range, kind of in between. So I played a variant of this in best of 3. I think this deck is better in best of one because it can kind of prey on some of the more aggressively slanted decks. Things like Flesh Gorger, Trespasser, tough for like mono red to deal with, Shieldred on the top end. If you want to see the best of 3 version, it's playing Gig's Command. I have a full video on it. I think it's a little bit weaker in best of 3 because you end up running into more of the ramp and control decks, and you're a little bit too slow with those. But I think in best of 1, it's super reasonable. So this version here, I do think the Liliana is a little scuffed, to be honest. I'd probably trim down and just play like another Go for the Throat. But you have a number of kind of reasonable creatures on curve. Evolved Sleeper is a very good mana sink. Tainted Adversary is a good blocker early and then can make you some zombies. Tenacious Underdog keeps coming back. Graveyard Trespasser eats away at your opponent's graveyard. The Phyrexian Fleshworm, more often than not, will be cast for 3 mana. So 3 mana, 3/3 lifelink menace that costs your opponent life to deal with is also a really good threat. It helps you race in some matchups. Obviously, Shieldred on the top end. And then just a bunch of removal. The Myrex really good in the grindy matchups just to keep making tokens. So that's pretty much it for the week. As I said, let me know in the comments what you've been playing, what you've been liking, how you've been having success on the ladder. And we'll come back with some more content later in the week. Thanks for watching, everyone. Hope you have a great one and stay safe out there.